but also in terms of history and how they are represented within the past. For far too long, this has occurred. From South African government, I will propose ratification from this. Before I go into political or social reasons within these circumstances, we actively suppress on these people for them to be able to move forward. But we're not only going to place this debate within third world nations. Let's give them the best case scenario. We're also going to talk about first world nations like America and UK. We're going to talk about passive discrimination. This means the language that they use in order to describe certain forms of atrocities has happened within these circumstances, right? It means the way that they describe it. For example, when we talk about the Sri Lankan war, they use pacification or other words to describe actively going down there and gunning down individuals, limbs flying apart, torn around us, reaching more speech, right? We recognize that the use of these languages and the use of passive languages in these circumstances underpin a lot of the suffering that these minorities have gone through within these circumstances. It's also a form of passive discrimination that happens throughout history. Regardless of third world nations to first world nations, we're going to defend the spectrum in today's debate. Firstly, what are we talking about when we talk about national history? We're talking about the histories that's taught within schools in these circumstances, meaning whatever you learn within primary school, secondary school, so on and so forth, independently ratified. This means gaining a seal of approval by a certain group of minority groups. I'll define the group later, but the seal of approval means that you have to have these things go through these groups in order for them to gain that approval. If they do not give this approval, then you have to go back and so on. I'll explain the process. But this board of minority groups and how do they look? This will be transcend into the policy, right? These groups are going to look like a minority group that is independent from the government in all circumstances. They're also going to be groups that are decided by individuals. So for example, if we're talking about an Indian representative or a Chinese representative within Malaysia, it is determined by the communities that currently stand in these circumstances. Or for example, Sabah and Sarawak, they're picked by these communities and therefore they're ratified by these people. We believe that these communities will pick people who are wise within history in all circumstances, right? Parameters, how will this work? This means that the current syllabus is decided by the government and then it goes straight to schools. That's the process that goes on. We are proposing a transcending here, a ratification. It means your syllabus goes through these groups and minority groups where discussions occur within these circumstances that are independent from government control. From these discussions, they will either approve or disapprove and can give comments towards this, and it goes back into the system, and this system repeats itself until you come up with something that's approved by both the government and the minority groups in these circumstances, and that enters the schooling and the teaching system. That means students get the education that they require and that they need, which is ratified by minority groups in all circumstances. We think that this is fair. Principal argumentation followed by tangible argumentation in these circumstances. Before that, a point of information, no. Principal justification. In today's debate, the principle coming out from open government is the principle of history and representation, why it's important for minority groups to be represented within history, and why this ratification is the only way for us to be able to do so, right? So what is history and what's the purpose of history? We recognize that the purpose of history is for the understanding of the roots that you come from, right? It means the understanding of your background, your identity, your culture, comes from the education that you learn within these curriculums. It means that history curriculum cannot teach you that, and history curriculum is something that's unjust within these circumstances, because it not only oppresses you, but it's also like gives you the lack of knowledge that you would need to access as a student in all circumstances. In the status quo, we recognize is dominated by majorities in most circumstances, either political oppression, which is active, or passive oppression through languages and support. Why is this particularly important? We think history represents not only, for example, knowledge, but also an identity of and a culture of a certain minority individual. That means in most circumstances, other than being taught by your parents, a lot of history gets washed down when not recorded and taught constantly towards these individuals. It means you forget about culture, you forget about identity, or at least bits and pieces as time progresses through generations, right? You recognize that because you forget these bits and pieces, that's why we have national history curriculums to teach it to you in all circumstances. But it's heavily dominated by majorities, heavily oppressed within these circumstances. It means minority individuals don't get to be represented within these histories and circumstances. But what does this really mean, and why is this extremely important within these circumstances? We think the misrepresentation of these minority groups means that they're unable to understand their identity and their culture. On top of that, they're also perceived as worse, right? That means when we talk about the Indian community within Malaysia, we perceive them as being rubber tappers and having no purpose whatsoever, and therefore they are like a community that doesn't matter within these areas because of the false history that we talk about, even though technically we came here first, right? But yeah, in these circumstances, we recognize that the teaching of history gets to change the perceptions that occur within these areas. But even in circumstances where it doesn't change the perception, what does it do? It means that these communities understand their identity and are more willing to enter discussion tables in the status quo. So a lot of children don't want to engage in discussions within political or social spheres because no one understands the history, because they've never been taught the history, right? Don't listen to them, they don't know what's going on. Don't listen to them, they don't represent a community. Don't listen to them, they're wrong and their history has been altered in order to oppress you. This sort of knowledge is being taught and repeated to children, regardless of even Malaysia, but also in third world and first world nations by minority parents, right? Because they are true and they have been oppressed within these circumstances because they lack the ability to identify in these areas. That's why ratification is particularly important. Because your representation within government groups have been failing. The reason being because they are minorities. Their voices are drowned out in most circumstances, or they need to maintain their job, so they're willing to give in to certain things from governments. That's why independent ratification is independent from your government oppression that occurs within these circumstances. What we need from the side opposition It's a principal understanding of what history does, why government does this better in comparison to ratification by minority groups. The simple stance from opening opposition is when ratification occurs, these groups literally approve of the history that's being taught, therefore the perception slowly changes within the country on the ground, and also the things taught within you changes. But how does it change tangibly? There's this neglecting of the principle. So what's this mean? That means, if we can prove to you that history is being taught within these circumstances, it's principally just for this history to do so. We think minority individuals are better able to understand themselves in these circumstances. Not only does it mean better understanding, meaning understanding of culture and so on, the thriving of their culture, and in of itself as a principle, the thriving of a culture should be credited. We think on top of that it means better discussions in general, meaning the minority groups are willing to enter these circumstances and want to discuss with you. But on top of that, the perception of these minority groups changes. So it no longer becomes false information disseminated due to false history and government oppression, but becomes this information that is ratified by these groups, taught to our children, and therefore better understanding happens for newer generations to come forward, right? It means your children will understand the history and where you came from within these circumstances. But what does this mean for minority groups as a last quick extension, right? We think that the way that you treat them and the perception that happens within these countries means there's less discrimination through history, right? It means you can no longer say that these groups have no particular value in these circumstances. But even when you can, we believe that because you have history and the understanding of history, it means better policies by governments within long-term and nation, right? It means we have an entire generation who understands the policy, that means you're more likely to be able to cater policies to these circumstances. We see this in America all the time because we understand how the Black Civil War occurs or how certain areas became ghettos. We can make policies better for these circumstances due to better understanding. From self-opening government, but we give you the policy, I think the principle is about history and understanding of this. The tangible is that minority individuals understand race better, and groups are able to sexualize, and governments are able to better help these groups. For all those reasons, never
Okay. Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Now, to extend the debate to the opposition side, I'd like to invite the leader of opposition here.
Okay, here. Oh, sorry. Just give me a moment. Hold on now.
Mr. Speaker, side opposition do adhere to the fact that and recognize the fact that there are discrimination that occurs within society. We do see textbooks being altered by the government themselves, and then they alter history, and we see how it's principally unjust, leading to misconceptions about the minorities. But what we do not agree with in the opposition is that we do not agree with the approach they're taking with. Because first, we need to understand how it actually works. Because once you have a independent body that actually governs the syllabus that comes out, and then they alter it, and then once they reject it, they're coming back and forth, we see that it's going to be much more detrimental to children themselves, which the government did not really mention, which is the lowest common denominator in this case. We see how children are being affected in schools when they are being taught different the false version of history. So we see how it's also quite similar to the legislative process in the UK. We see how when the House of Commons and the House of Lords, when they have different kind of ideas, and then we see how the same resolution can ping back and forth. And we see how it actually delay the resolution being released out, and in the end, the people are not going to get the resolution. It's similar to this case where once the government do come up with their version of the history, and then once they release out, the independent body will just reject it and then coming back and forth. We see how children in the end, they don't really get to enjoy studying as much as they want to, because now they have different version and changes. Even if it's minute or drastic change, we see how the textbook keep on changing every few years. In the end, it's just going to make their life harder, because once they don't know what's truth and what's false now, they are basically stuck in two sides where different people are trying to get their versions of their histories out, and in the end, we see how these children will in the end be tainted and be affected throughout, because first they are going to be
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to invite the Deputy Prime Minister. Here.
Here.
Throughout my 5 years in secondary school, other than hearing the name Yap Ah Loy as an important Chinese person with their history books, all I have heard is that Chinese people are sneaky individuals who engaged in guerrilla warfare during the Japanese occupation. You have to very quickly understand that history is not just a bunch of words in your textbook and a picture of Tunku Abdul Rahman in your Malaysian textbook. It is also a very important medium to shaping the perception of individuals, not only to yourself as an individual identity within a country, but also your perception towards other minority groups. The idea that Indians will always be poor rubber duckers, the idea that Chinese individuals will always be sneaky individuals who engage in guerrilla warfare, the idea that Chinese individuals started off May 13 within Malaysia and killed off all the Malays, when in reality it was a mutual war at that point in time. I think that there has been accurate, but there has been false misrepresentation that has existed within your history textbooks that are being ingrained into the minds of young children within your country. We're not just talking about individuals who are fully qualified and understand the ins and outs of how the government is altering your textbook so that they can spread their agenda. These are innocent, vulnerable individuals within your schools who are absorbing your information like sponges, so that at the end of the day they grow up to be individuals who carry on that information into their adulthood. Right? Earlier on in Roshan's speech, he told you two very important things, two of which were still unresponded to coming off the start opening opposition. Firstly, he told you about the principal justification as to why we should promote this policy, simply because as a government, you should focus on protecting your minorities. But secondly, he also gave you an introduction as to the tangible benefits that can be achieved, which I'll further explain later in my speech. Before that, a few responses towards side opening opposition, right? Firstly, their main rebuttal was that our policy is weird and they would rather have a counter proposal of putting minorities into the governmental bodies themselves, having seats in parliament, because that would be a better way, because our side will have confusion. I would argue that if an influx of the voices of minorities leads to confusion, their policy will still have that harm. Their question then becomes, why is your policy something which is better if the confusion is going to come about anyway within your own logic? But more importantly, I don't think that individuals will be confused, right? I think that individuals will be more confused if your textbooks are not accurate, if your textbooks are continuously being altered by a government in order to spread your propaganda. I would argue that the confusion exists anyway. But more importantly, if they're going to want to have conversation, I would also argue that discourse happens better on the outside when you have more accurate representation of minority groups, instead of these weird lies that are being spread at the end of the day which hinder that discourse, because the assumption is that the majority voice will always matter more. But secondly, he also told you about how children will be hurt in a majority of circumstances, because kids won't know what is true, they'll get confused because the syllabus keeps changing. I think this is strange. Firstly, I think that changing the perception of children towards history is better if we are able to spread the truth to these children. But secondly, I don't think that kids will be confused, right? So the question then becomes, how do we get them or help them achieve that truth? And I have a very amazing policy to give you, right? We have an independent body of minority representatives ratifying false truths or false lies within these textbooks so that these children can access that truth, right? That's the exact policy that Roshan spent like 2 minutes of his speech trying to explain to you and why exactly this policy is important. I think that it is a cop-out for them to come up here and tell us that simply because our policy is something they would rather not live in, then our case is something which falls. Before responding to the principal. No thank you. What am I going to be talking to you about in my speech? I'm going to be talking about the tangible benefits to protecting and helping these minorities on multiple levels. So firstly, let's understand what we want in this world. I think it's been mutually agreed upon so far in this debate. We want better lives and perceptions of these minorities for these minorities. And to achieve this, we need a more accurate representation within history, which is a claim that we come up here on side opening government with. Secondly, why is history so important? And this is something that Roshan has already told you in his speech, right? It plays a very big role in shaping your identity, your perception of other minorities, and also the narratives that history sets also set future narratives for these minorities, which is exactly what's been happening within Malaysia, right? 61 years after independence, there is still strong discrimination against minority groups for things that they have or have not done in history, simply because they're not in the textbooks, excuse me. But more importantly, I think that it has also shaped the discrimination and enhanced discrimination that has existed within the state and scope. But also very quickly, a very quick response to the weird thing about how extreme minority individuals who enter these minority groups and suddenly new ISIS will spawn out from the depths of the ocean. I think that this doesn't make sense. But more importantly, we've already set the parameters for this debate, and within our policy, we've also told you that the individuals within these minority independent groups will be individuals who are qualified within history, who know what they're talking about, and who will be rectifying these things. We're not throwing in your random Indian person from the street into these groups and asking them to correct this history, right? But first level to my argument on tangibles, what can we achieve? Firstly, I think that we provide representation for these individuals in history, which is extremely important in shaping their identities. Especially within education, when you're talking about children who read and grow up to be your adult civilians later, it's extremely important to be able to see you and your community as a community which matters in the building of that country. The idea that you're involved in the backbone of that country, right? To build a united country, if you're going to be talking about tackling this form of discrimination, I think that the importance is to understand that every single minority group and every single group of individuals that exist within that community plays a big role in the success of that community. The fact that most Malaysians don't know that there was a Chinese representative and an Indian representative within the group who went to London to get our independence already proves that Malaysians simply do not see an importance in learning about minorities and the influence that these minorities have upon the success of our country, simply because these textbooks do not allow these children to have the gateway into learning these things. But before that, sure, anyone.
If oppression is so strong in a society that you have considered it is true, then why will a curriculum that is made by minority helps the minority to voice themselves out?
Because they are represented in their textbooks. Look, right? We're not gonna remove all the history of the majority. I think it's more of like providing a more accurate representation to the severity or the impacts that minorities have within your history. So I don't necessarily understand what the POI is. Secondly, I think that on the outside, we start up a better perception for other minority groups. The assumption that certain groups are attributed to certain things has been shaped by history and enforced by history simply because we assume that this form of history will always be true. I think that accurate representation leads to more emphasis upon these individuals within your country and also leads to better lawmaking, law changes, and emphasis on the help that these minorities need that has been neglected within our society. We think that to correct these laws in order to protect these individuals, you have to have more representation for them. The understanding that there are issues that individuals are still facing can only come up when you understand the struggles that they had gone through in history. But more importantly, I think that the better lives that you can garner for these individuals is exclusive to giving them that representation, especially through such an influential medium that is history. What have we told you about coming up from side opening government? We think that our side ultimately protects these minorities better because we allow them the voice to speak out. But more importantly, we also allow them the voice to showcase what they have done in our history, what they have done in the past that shaped the society that we have as of now. That benefit cannot exist if they aren't given that voice. We're extremely proud to propose.
Okay. Thank you very much. Now I'd like to invite Deputy Leader of Opposition here again.
So what government failed to mention was that how this alternative history, how this alternative independent group would affect our children's education in the long term. Well, let me tell you. In their scenario where you have an independent group altering history, changing history for children to learn, what would happen is that you would have this group exposing these children to radical ideas which are much more over-exaggerated because these groups have already been hurt by this history. They would alter history in such a way whereby it would be more over-exaggerated and more prejudiced and biased towards their own side than others. For example, let me give you a Malaysian example. So we all live in Malaysia, right? And we all know that Chinese and Indians are the minority, right? So the Japanese war, they took over our country. Chinese people do not like the Japanese because they raped our women, okay? So basically, if I portray them in such an so we would portray what they did in such an over-exaggerated term, which would lead to prejudice and bias in the US. And Islamic radicals in overseas in Islamic peninsulas, what they do is that they use this history. They say, no, look at these white people, they're killing our people, they're raping, they did all these things to us, they taxed us and things like that. And so they built this mindset, one-sided, no thank you, this one-sided perspective into their children since young. And then you have children becoming radicals. And then when you ask these children, why are you doing this? They say, oh, because they hurt our race. They hurt my grandmother, my grandfather, my brothers, my sisters, they hurt them, so I will hurt them back. This is really what the government side is proposing. No, thank you. No, thank you. Next thing, they refuse to acknowledge the fact that this does not only impact national students, but it also impacts international relations. For example, I'll bring up again the Chinese and the Japan example. So right now, and especially in this day and age, in the 21st century, what we need the most is international relations. We need to work together, and not as a country, but as a community, as a world, as like one big like earth to help progress ourselves, to stop wars, to stop famine, to stop the radical movements. So instead, what would happen on the government's side? Let me tell you what would happen on the government's side. So what would happen is that because every single race has their own biased perspective and cites their own side, how would we ever hope to achieve international relations? I'll give you an example. So Trump keeps on saying, we need to make America great, we need to kick out the Mexicans and all that. And then obviously in the Mexican textbook you have things like, these white people are kicking us out, they took our land, this is originally ours, and things like that. So instead of working together to build up their own communities, to make sure there's good taxation laws on each side, both of them work equally diplomatically together, instead what you have is a very segregated world that can never hope to achieve progress at a much faster rate than it should be.
Clarification?
No, thank you. And next, what will happen is the government refuses to admit the fact that if we were to implement an independent group of people aside the government, what would we be doing? What would we be doing is repeating the cycle. So, okay, first of all, you have bias because the majority cites history on their side. So what your plan is to have a minority party come up and alter history again? Are you joking? So basically, no thank you. So basically you have another party coming in, they're altering history one more time, you don't get the truth anywhere, all you get is a one-sided perspective from the majority, another perspective from the minority. So basically our children, no thank you. So basically all our children will be learning is different sides of people's thinking and different sides of people's views. And lastly, what they proposed was an independent party away from the government. So I'm going to assume that, no thank you, so I'm going to assume that the government thinks that the government itself is inadequate to provide our children education, and therefore you need an independent party. And so let me tell you what happens when you have an independent party away from the government, okay? These kids are going to grow up the mindset, oh, this independent party is like so much better than the government's party. Hey, come on now, let's not support the government anymore. Let's support this independent party. And then you have kids going against the government. Instead of equality, you're promoting segregation and inadequacy of the government itself. The government's job is there to protect its citizens, to give it enough education for it to progress into the future. Instead, we provide an alternative. Our side's alternative is a board in the government itself, which consists of members from the majority and minority to alter history. In this sense, we do not have an independent party working against the government, which can fuel people's anger and fuel people's rage.
Thank you very much. Now to start the second half of the debate, I'd like to invite the landlord government here.
if side government concedes that the oppression within the society is such a great extent, we believe that the independent body of a minority will not do much, but they will further let the minorities to be oppressed to begin with, right? We believe that the goal of side opposition is never to prove how we are able to let minorities void themselves out, but we are only here to prove to you why we want to avoid all the harms that is done towards the minority. A couple of response towards the government houses. Firstly, they wanted to talk about how they have understanding of background. We believe that that is false to begin with, because number one, I believe that this curriculum that they are trying to let the majority to study will not be trusted anyways to begin with. Because number one, majority will perceive these curriculum as lies, since now their grandfathers or grandmothers tell them that your curriculum that you are studying is manipulated by a group of minorities and not your race, right? So they are more likely to use words to tempt you into believing that the other race is actually doing something that is right. We believe that this is why this is the stigmatization that is happening within a society that side government is not solving to begin with, and this is exactly the stigmatization that will not change the perception of the majority, but will further oppress the minorities to begin with. No, thank you. Because number one, they believe that now minorities need a group of independent body to help them, which means that they are weak to begin with. Number two, we believe that they are also saying lies about themselves and also about their race, since this is a board of representatives which is represented by the minorities to begin with. So since now I've proven that the curriculum that side government, no thank you, is brought up by the government is actually ineffective to begin with and will not be trusted within the society, we believe that all the understanding of background and how they want to voice out minority to have representation to begin with will not happen as well. All of these benefits that they can accrue can only happen when the syllabus is trusted by both the majority as well as the minority. And sure.
Ratification means approval. So the government needs to approve of it, and these independent groups need to approve of it. So how does your extreming or your discrimination occur if the government still needs to approve the syllabus?
So the point in which your government approves the syllabus is not doesn't actually represent the perceptions that is happening within the society to begin with. We believe that there is still the old generations which have these conservative mindsets and their staunch beliefs in no thank you, in which they believe that all your Chinese not being terrorists or how your Indian not being poor rubber tappers is lies, and they believe that this is true, although it is still a lie. We believe that this is when they will tell their younger generations or their sons and grandsons that this is actually true, and what your curriculum is teaching you is false to begin with. And no thank you, a response to the closing house on how they believe that the lies about the majority is rightfully justified, which means they concede that they want to use a counter stereotype in order to solve the problem. Right? We believe that this is very problematic to begin with, because this is also my argument for you today on how the government actually further worsens the situation. Because the point in which you use counter stereotype that by manipulating the words and phrases in your textbooks, you impose a different perceptions which is not accepted by the majority to begin with. And it is easier for the majority to tell the minorities what is right because they are the majorities, right? We believe that the point in which your majority do not believe your syllabus because they have conservatives as well as people who have staunch beliefs in those lies that were constantly propagated towards them. We believe that this is the point in which your majority race students will also not get to know the syllabus, will also not believe in the syllabus made by the minority, and further extends the gap between the race of the majority and the minority. No thank you. Because the point in which the majority thinks that it is a rigged curriculum, we believe that all the representation and how you get to voice these people, the minorities' perceptions out, will not happen to begin with. And this leads to two possible outcomes. Number one, there is easier oppression towards and more oppression towards the minority. Why so? Because now the majority thinks that they are weak, since they need a people to manipulate things that they believe are lies in order to help them. Is the point in which they will also more, no thank you, not trust these people and further oppress them. Number two, we believe that the stigmatization that these people are poor and how they are terrorists will also strengthen, because now since government considered that the stigmatization is so strong, they need to provide us a logical link on how a sudden change by minorities themselves in the curriculum is able to let this majority, no thank you, to believe in that curriculum to begin with and to bring a change in stigmatization. My second argument for you today is pretty simple. We believe that there is also a more possibility for these minority boards to actually make an imbalanced curriculum to begin with. Why so? Because number one, they are always oppressed by majorities. So the point in which they believe that they are oppressed means they will also say lies, no thank you, about the majorities, which the majorities do not agree with to begin with. So the point in which they manipulate these lies into truths to the minorities, which the minorities believe, is the point in which the gap between the majority and the minority strengthens, right? No thank you. We also believe that there is no incentive coming up from the Board of Representatives in order to help this majority to begin with, because they have full power to manipulate whatever they want to write in the textbook, right? And what leads to this is basically because how the history becomes imbalanced for the minorities as well. So what is the comparison between the imbalance under our side and under side government, right? We believe that the imbalance under side opposition is the point in which maybe minority is still oppressed and how they are still not able to voice out their perceptions. But even if we are still more willing to live under our side, because number one, since we avoid more oppression coming out from side government, and let's make a comparison in what will happen inside government's world, right? We believe that what will happen under side government is basically how this majority now believes that these people need a board of minority representatives in order to help them, and the point in which it is imbalanced towards the minority side also gives them a reason to why they should actually hate the minorities to begin with. That is why we believe that the efforts that side government is trying to do not only worsens the situation but also does not help to voice out the perception. Side opposition may not be helping the minorities to voice themselves out, but at least we avoid them from getting more oppression. With that, I'm rest my case. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sorry. I would like to invite Carl Wood.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, the main clash between both sides in today's
when you are constantly oppressed, you do not need a counter stereotype or a counter narrative for you to actually change the perception of people. What this does is only makes the situation much worse, because these conflicting ideas will not bring any change to the majority, because the staunch belief of the majority and the staunch belief of the conservative society will not change anyway under their side. They have failed to prove how the government will actually approve this kind of syllabus at the very first place, since the government has conflicting ideas, which really leads me to my first issue on how will the government not accept these curriculums in their best case. We think that the government will less likely not accept these curriculums because I think that they have very conflicting ideas. The government consists of the majority. We think that when the majority want to prove that they are much more superior, it's less likely that they will accept a syllabus where the minorities will look much better. We think that this is the ideology that their side has failed to prove, is because their side have not really proved the logical link on how the government actually approve it in the long term. We think that they themselves consider that they have a back and forth discussion, but we think that this back and forth discussion will not end under their side. It will continuously occur because they cannot come to a certain consensus for them to actually decide a proper curriculum. More importantly, we think that they are living in a very fake world that does not actually occur. We think that it's not. They try to argue that they will provide something that's more factually accurate. I think that is something very false under their side because they want to prove each other's image. I think that when you counter stereotype is something very bad, which they are trying to propose, just that it's in the school and not in media. We think there's something much more very harmful because people will not actually believe the representation that you are trying to propose. We think that even if there's a certain form of representation, we think that their side, that the majority will still believe that it's false because they already have the staunch beliefs. What our side does is reduces the amount of oppression that's already there. We think that once your body tries to counter the government, that's when people actually believe the stereotypes that the minorities are bad. We don't see how their side actually improves the situation and only makes it much worse. But before that, yes.
This debate cannot happen in an extreme world where you continuously assume that a policy will never go through. In cases where minorities aren't extreme and they are logical people, which is the status quo, would you then decide to be fine with a policy?
Usually, I'm already going to move that on to my next issue, it's in my second issue, so I'll deal with that. So moving on to my second issue, what is the comparative between a better discussion and also between more manipulation, which they try to prove on that will happen under our side. I think that even if you have a certain representation for minorities that are qualified, we think that number one, they have more knowledge of the oppression that occurs. So it is more likely for them to be aggressive, and it's more likely for them to be more radical towards the idea since they have knowledge about the history and since they know how their ancestors have been tortured in the past, so there's no obligation for them to help their majority at the very first place. Second level, we think that they want to cater to their own society. So what this does is that they cater to society by providing a more pro-minority textbook, and we want to help the society improve their quality of life. Their ideology never proved to you on how these educated intellectuals of the minorities will actually support the majority at the long term. We think that this representation is less likely to occur under their side. We think that it's more likely for them to lead to more backlash. We think that the increasing conflict for a minority group to produce a more pro-minority textbook or pro-minority curriculum is much more likely to happen. I think that the minorities have no obligation to have the majority at the very first place. We don't see how this logical link actually takes place under their side. I think that if you change the syllabus, more people will believe that it's fake because you try to change something that is not actually, you try to change something and you don't provide a concrete evidence that it is true. But what's the comparative that they try to bring? They try to bring that how you will garner more change in perception and the majority will slowly not discriminate. And they also say that children get to benefit because children get to know what is right under their side. We think that the much more discrimination will happen on your side in schools because you see that even in schools now, minority children are discriminated. What happens in their side? In their side, minority children will be more discriminated because they know that they have a certain body that has to help them. So it makes them look even more weaker than they already are. So there's certain statements like, oh, you have to clean my table because you are Indian and stuff like that will increase under their side. So you don't see how it's actually helping the mindset of the children. What this does is that the children are actually more likely to believe their elders and their parents. How so? Because they believe that what the parents are saying is true because they are actually related, or they have obligation towards the parents. They do not have the obligation towards the minority to help them improve their quality of life. Under Gulf context, we think that understanding can still happen through certain means of internet. Let's say they get to know their culture through the internet and stuff like that. So we don't see how their side actually helps improve understanding, since the minorities will already know about their own culture. But before that, yes.
Yeah, so that means your stance in today's debate is that we're going to let them be oppressed, let their history be forgotten, and we're going to let the majority oppose and oppress these individuals. And that's something you're happy with.
We see that the status quo is already bad, but when you do this when you create a body, it will be much worse. We are not saying that the situation will improve under our side, but it's much worse under your side, because you're much more avenue for you to be oppressed and much more slower changes for you to pass on from the curriculum. We think that if you have conflicting ideas, how on earth will you agree to the other side in the very beginning? So it's more likely for them not to have a change in curriculum, and their whole stance will fall from the very beginning. To the last issue on how will help the representation of minority better, they try to bring up on how some form of positive representation will occur. We think that when minority does something wrong and they've already provided this new syllabus, we think that's more likely for the representation to be lost much more faster under their side in comparison to our side, because they will try to propose on how minorities are hardworking. So since a majority see a minority that's lazy, then it's much more likely for them to discriminate them even more, because they know that the syllabus is much more fake and much more rigged. We think that on their side it makes them look that the representation is much more false and the body is not helping at the end of the day. We think on our side, what's the comparative we propose? We think that we propose that it takes a longer time. Yes, we consider it will take a longer time for natural change to occur, but I think that it does help the representation in some form. We think that the minority can overcome these stereotypes that's placed in society, and we see that it's happening even in status quo. We think that in the past, minorities are much more discriminated in comparison to now. We see that slow natural change occurring, and we don't see how it is not going to be better in the future. We think that the minorities have more avenue to overcome a certain stereotype if it's not completely changed. If you counter a stereotype that Chinese are good in mathematics by saying that Chinese are bad in mathematics, when people see that that stereotype is not true, discrimination is much more at a higher level. So we do not want these things to occur under any circumstance. Your side is providing a fake world that no one wants to live in, and we don't see how it will actually help the situation in the long run. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you everybody. This is possible. Shake hands, leave outside. I'll call you on some time.
I'm thinking you just need something.
Wow, very, very tension.